Handel was born on February 23rd, 1685, the same year as Bach, in Halle, Germany. His father was a very celebrated surgeon, and it was sort of expected Handel follow along in his footsteps and moving into a more academic career. However, when one of his father's friends heard him playing in the church and realized how much of a prodigy he was playing the organ, it sort of influenced him to follow along a different path. So when he was 18, he moved to Rome, and that's where he really fell in love with the Italian style of music and drew influences upon people such as Alexander Scarlatti that would follow him for the rest of his life. After Rome, he moved to Hanover to become a court musician. However, he quickly realized that Hanover was not the speed he was looking for, and he quickly moved to London, and that's where he would stay for the rest of his life. He was the first musician to have a biography written about him, and that's very interesting considering how little we actually know of his life. The information in that biography is not very accurate because Handel was a very private person. We know that he was never married, and he was a gambler. He had a big temper and a quick sense of humor. However, when it came to who he was behind closed doors, there isn't much to know about him. A very private person. The little that we do know comes from finding his personal letters. However, even with that, the man that he was, truly, no one really knows. When it comes to music, Handel wrote mainly Italian operas. He was a master of writing beautiful works of art, and very quickly he wrote over 40 operas at least in his lifetime. And sort of what distinguished him from other musicians was, if we're comparing him to Bach, who, again, they lived in the same time, Bach would write about praising God, whereas Handel would write about the feelings you felt when you were praising God. He played to the emotions of people. When you listen to his music, and you can really feel the humanity of it. In his life, Handel was funded by George I and the Princess of Wales, and he was really a music businessman, and this is sort of where he also differentiates from other musicians of his time. Sure, he was funded by some royals. However, he didn't stick to just that. A lot of people, like Bach, again, would really stay inside their safety circle. Bach never really left the court patronage, whereas Handel, he was an entrepreneur. He was an independent spirit. He left his court musicianship in Hanover to go to London because it was of a faster pace. At his death, his assets totaled £20,000. So I think it's safe to say that his business moves were very successful, because £20,000 in those times makes him a millionaire by today's standards. That money he later donated to friends, families, and orphanages, but it's very clear that he knew financial success. It's also very important to note that he was sort of a plagiarist, which only got worse as he became older and sicker. A lot of times musicians would take other pieces and interpret them into their own style and such, but Handel would sort of take passages, tweak them just a little bit, and put them into his own music. So that's sort of important to know if you're listening to his music. When it comes to his operas, he usually followed a similar formula. They were usually always based on classical or mythological figures, and they had not a lot going on in the plot, which was common of Baroque operas in general. Baroque opera is a very different experience in terms of the culture of it compared to when you go to the theater today. When you went to a Baroque opera in those times, it was very informal. You went to hang out with other people. If a singer got on stage that you didn't like, you could yell at them. You went to play cards with other people. You went to talk to your friends. Singers on stage would talk to their friends. It was quite a different time. An opera for Handel would typically just be a succession of da capo arias, maybe mixed in with some duets and large ensemble pieces. A da capo aria was when, at the end of the piece, the musicians would return to the beginning portion, repeat it, return to the head, which is what da capo means, and this is the time they would use to show off all their vocal abilities, really meant to show off what kind of singer they were. This was also the era of castrato singers, which are pretty much what they sound like, castrated males. They were popular from 1720 to 1790, and the way they came about was because after the church had banished female singers, they needed someone who was able to fill in those tones, and so castratos came about, and they weren't just famous because they could sing high. I think that's what we think of nowadays when we think of castrato singers, was they were popular because they could sing high. True, they could reach up to 4 octaves in range, but they also had amazing breath control. There are anecdotes of musicians going up against castratos and who could hold the note the longest, and castratos almost always won. They were one of the first musical superstars. You may think it's the Beatles. No, I'm sorry. It was actually castratos. They were popular among royals. They were given wealth and gifts. In terms of physique, they looked a little interesting. They had swollen torsos and really skinny legs, but they married, no kids of course, but they married, had relationships like a normal person, and so were the castratos. Later in Handel's life, he began to lose sight, which completely left him in 1752. It's also important to note that it was in this time period that he really began to leave Italian operas behind. Englishmen didn't really find them all that interesting anymore. First off, they took a lot of money to put on in terms of scenery and costume, but it was also in a language they didn't understand, of a culture they didn't really like. And so instead of importing foreign singers, spending money on all these costumery and scenery, Handel moved to English oratorios, which resonated more with the Englishman. Oratorios are just large compositions for solo voice, chorus, and orchestra, and does not include all this acting and scenery. And it was during this time that he wrote Messiah in 1741, which he finished in about 3 or 4 weeks, and it became such a smash hit, even today. Even if you don't know it, you know it. I'm going to play a little bit of it here so you could recognize it, and you'll know what I'm talking about.
Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Oh,
Messiah was one of his last largest successful compositions before he died on April 14th, 1759, of just poor health. And so was the life of Handel.